This is the 17th season of Bass Talk Live with your hosts, Mark Jeffries and Matt Pangrak. BTL is brought to you by Lawrence, Bass Cat Boats, APCO, Duck and Fishing, Strike King Lures, Sunline, Big Bite Baits, Spro, X-Zone Lures, Yamagatsu, The Bass Tank, and Denali Rods. BTL coming at you. Good Tuesday, everybody. Welcome once again to another edition of BTL Bass Talk Live, where Gene and I are going to talk bass fishing and anything else that we want to talk about. Yes, he is in studio, the man that knows more about the fish than anybody in the free world. I'm talking about Mr. Gene Gilliland. Gene, thank you for coming in to the chaos.
Hey, the chaos is behind you now, Mark. It's going to be smooth. Everything's going to work great, and I'm certainly glad to be here.
All right, man. A lot of people out there, they may not be aware, but we go way back, and I've kind of mentioned the story before, but Gene was an integral part of when this whole thing was in the infancy stage back in 1992, I think is what we figured out, 92, 93, kind of that range. And I made a trip over to Gene's house, and we stayed up till about midnight and kind of hashed out a bunch of ideas and concepts about this internet thing that was coming along. You remember that, Gene?
Yeah. It was, started out, let's do something to be able to report fishing tournament results and fishing reports across Oklahoma. And now look where it's evolved into so much more.
Yeah, that was a long time ago. And I mentioned on yesterday's show, I was really rude. I was super rude. The first time that I ever met you, he lived in the same neighborhood. We both lived in the same neighborhood here in Norman. And I just pulled right up to his house, and I made the decision that I was going to introduce myself to Gene Gilliland. And I got out of my truck, and I walked up, and Gene was messing around with his truck and boat and had his garage door open. And I said, "Hey, are you Gene Gilliland?" "Well, yeah. Hey, well, my name's Mark. And is there any way you can introduce me to Ken Cook?"
Of course, for people that may not be familiar with the backstory there, Ken Cook used to work for the Oklahoma Department of Wildlife Conservation.
Yeah.
And I worked for the department at that time. And Ken had just fairly recently left the department to turn pro and was, pursuing his professional career. And so, Mark assumed that I had some connection there somehow.
You did,
and I did. We worked that out. So, but yeah, and then it kind of went from there. I got Mark into our bass club, the North Oklahoma City Bassmasters.
Yeah.
Mark started fishing our club, and we got to know each other. And as this internet thing sort of developed, self-taught Mark Jeffries over here decided he wanted to get into it, and just 2 or 3 nights he'd come over to the house and we'd talk about, where's this going and how's this going to work.
That was in the 56K modem days.
Yeah,
that was not high-speed internet days.
Yeah, that was that was golly. I mean, that's like glacial time ago.
30 years ago.
Like. Yeah. It was a long time ago.
And I remember the good sound that the 56K modem would make. And I had the Hewlett Packard. That was a big thing back then. And the Packard Bell. Mm-hmm. Remember the Packard Bell PCs? And they were ginormous, but that's what you had to have back then to really make waves with the technology that was available. And I paid some ungodly amount for that thing.
Yeah.
And it was super, super slow. It had like 256K memory, and it didn't have Windows, and it was a mess. But that was really cool. Now, do you remember where we had our Bass Club meetings at?
Well, at one time we had them at the bowling alley.
That's right.
We had them at a bowling alley here in Moore.
That does not exist anymore because the tornado just completely trashed
it out. Yeah, we've had to move around over the years to different locations for one reason or another, but they're still going. The club's still going. It's 30 plus years now that they're still fishing.
Yeah. A lot of questions today about fizzing fish, and we're going to get into that. We actually have a second camera set up to where Gene can do close-ups of some of the show and tell items that he's brought today to get into the whole fizzing thing. So yes, we are going to get into that. I even received emails from people that could not make the live show that definitely wanted you to discuss and talk about that subject. So we're definitely going to get into that. The first thing that we're going to do, Gene, I just kind of want to get your thoughts on the season from a fish care standpoint, and really anything else that you want to throw out there as far as the Elite Series from this year. Is there any highlights that we can kind of dive into? Is there anything that really kind of stuck out from a fish care standpoint? And just kind of jump in there and talk about the season.
Well, this past year was a little different, obviously with kind of coming out of the pandemic, the previous year, things really, really changed drastically. And a lot of the procedures that we had to go through at all of our tournaments, and a lot of people may not know that BASS, the way we run a weigh-in is the same at a high school tournament, at an open, or at an elite. The procedures that we go through are pretty much the same for all those different levels. It's different numbers of people fishing, but for the most part, the process of handling the fish is pretty much the same. And part of that is because over the years, we've just developed this system that really works. Mm-hmm. And so a lot of times I don't have to go to every tournament. I get to pick and choose. One of the nice things about my job is that I can kind of cherry pick the events that I go to. And so I don't go to all the elites. I go to a handful of opens and high school, college, just kind of mix them up. I'll go places where they might need extra help. Mm-hmm. If it's going to be really hot, or if we're going to have really big numbers of boats, like when we had our high school national championship, we had 300 plus boats. So a lot of times I'll pick those events to try to go to help out. But for the most part, the staff does the same process at each event. And we're pretty proud of the fact that over the years, the numbers of fish that we release after our tournaments is typically on the north side of 95%. And so, that's a testament to both how the anglers are taking care of their fish, which they've gotten much better in that over the years. But the fact that our tournament staff does a great job. And we always have we have help from volunteers, local anglers, people in the Bass Nation in whatever state or location we're at. But this year, the challenge, the most challenging one, I think one of them was that high school tournament where we had 300 plus boats. Now, again, that's, with the high school teams, it's only 5 fish per boat.
Right.
So it's, you compare that to an open that has 200 boats with an angler, a pro and a co-angler, potentially you've got, 400 bags of fish coming across the stage.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
So it's you got to kind of play the numbers there. But the one that we probably put the most emphasis on this year was the elite tournament at Waddington, the St. Lawrence River. And a lot of the reason that we've done that is because that fishery is very special. The smallmouth population up there is something that we really treasure, we value. And so we put a lot more emphasis on fish care at those events that we have in New York, and particularly on the St. Lawrence. And so this year we had 2 things that went on. One, we had extra people to make sure that we covered all the bases. We had lots of ice. available for the anglers and for our use at the weigh-in, so we could keep the water temperatures where we wanted them. And then the other thing we did was education. And this is the second or third year now that we've done that, where Barb Elliott, our New York Bass Nation Conservation Director, people call her the fizz queen, because she went up there, and she lives, I don't know, an hour and a half, 2 hours from Waddington, but she went up there and camped out at the boat ramp for 3 days prior to the tournament, offering fizzing training to all of the anglers.
Yeah, I remember that. Yeah.
And then she stays around for the weigh-in and helps on the live release boat. And she also did the same thing. A few weeks later, we had the college national championship on the St. Lawrence River.
Mm-hmm.
She did the same thing. She went up there, and they had the anglers come to her during the practice days prior to the tournament for fizzing training. And then she did it again at the Open just a few weeks ago in Clayton. And so it's a really important part of the process of educating the anglers on how to do things right. And there's, in this day of social media, there is so much misinformation out there.
Imagine that.
Everybody that's got a camera and wants to be a YouTube star puts out videos, and unfortunately, there's a lot of it that's just wrong. And, people say, well, I've done my research. Well, it's really not research, because there's not any controlled experiments. There's not any, it's not a scientific process when all you do is say, I've done this for years and this is how it is. That's how it is for you, but that's not necessarily the right way to do things.
We're going to find out the right way,
and we'll get into that.
Right.
Yeah, that tournament we put special emphasis on those tournaments on the St. Lawrence River, and a big part of the reason we do that, obviously, people are very concerned about keeping those big smallmouth alive, but there are I don't want to call them problems, but
challenges.
There are some challenges going on in that fishery right now.
Yeah.
Both New York and Ontario are finding that the reproduction of the smallmouth is declining and has been for several years. Now, granted, the weights that people are seeing in these tournaments are bigger and bigger and bigger because the fish are getting fatter, eating gobies.
Mm-hmm.
But those fish are old, and there are not as many young smallmouth bass coming up to replace them. And so it's certainly in everyone's best interest to take care of those fish as best we can to prolong that.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I think that somewhere down the line in the future, the state of New York and the province of Ontario are likely going to put some additional restrictions on things. Ontario has already moved their opening day of the bass season later in the year to protect more of those fish during the spawn. I suspect New York may follow suit sometime in the next year, 2 or 3. And I think tournaments are probably going to have to adjust how they do business up there, because that fishery has those challenges. And I think that's something that we're just going to have to look at and keep track of. A lot of the tournaments in Canada have already gone to a 4-fish limit instead of 5. And people think, well, that's okay, big deal, 4 fish instead of 5. Well, when you think about it, that's 20% fewer fish in the live well, or 20% less that we have to deal with at a weigh-in. And that's a pretty significant number when you're talking about hundreds and hundreds of bass that are being caught.
Right.
So those are the kind of things that are going to have to be looked at. But back to your original question about the challenges, and that tournament was, those on the St. Lawrence River are easily the ones that we focus on and say that we want to put special emphasis on those. Where we've got extremely hot conditions, obviously it's just a matter of stepping up the game a little bit and making sure we've got enough people and enough ice. And we still follow that same set of procedures. We just, certain parts of it, we just do a little more of. And we generally come out okay on it.
Let me ask you this. How challenging was the Bassmaster Classic this summer?
You know, I've worked the Classic every year since 1993. And this year I had more concern about it than just about any year that I can remember. You know, we used to have classics in the summertime where you dealt with the heat. This time we dealt with the heat plus a 90-minute drive from Ray Roberts to Fort Worth. And that when we had to move the tournament from March to June, immediately the red flags went up with us and with Texas Parks and Wildlife. And we said, we've got to come up with a plan to deal with this. And we did. That's one of the great things that I think came out of that event was between us and Texas Parks and Wildlife, we had a lot of meetings, a lot of discussions, and we came up with a plan on how to make this work. And as people that follow the sport know, we actually weighed the fish the first 2 days at the lake and released most of them right there. The anglers got to bring in their 2 largest fish to Fort Worth to show in the arena, but we'd actually weighed them. And the ones that didn't make the trip to Fort Worth went on the live release boat right away and were turned loose. They didn't have to make that haul to town. The other thing that we did, and Parks and Wildlife's crew was fabulous in terms of their participation in this. When the boats got into the arena or the staging lot behind the arena, we had crews jump in every boat and they were checking water temperatures and oxygen levels in all the live wells. They had little mini oxygen bottles and air stones that they put in every boat to give the fish a little boost of oxygen as they were waiting to come through for the weigh-in. And so, and then as the boat pulled into the arena, we'd take that oxygen bottle out and put it back to one that was at the end of the line and just rotated those through the system. And the results worked. We had very few mortalities. The Parks and Wildlife crew, I think they were very impressed with how well the anglers took care of their fish. We got them back in their hauling trucks, and then Parks and Wildlife took the fish back to the lake, and then we offloaded them onto our live release boats and spread them around the lake. And so it was for all the hand wringing and worry and stuff we had going into it, the plan that we made worked very, very well. And I think everyone was very pleased with the process. A lot of the folks that just assumed we were going to kill every fish that was caught because of the 90-mile drive, or the 90-minute drive, was going to be a real big problem. But the plan worked, and we had contingencies built into it that most of them we didn't ever have to use. And I had a number of our Bass Nation conservation directors that come to the Classic every year, that they volunteer to come and help with that process. We call them the Fish Care Dream Team. And we've got folks from not only in Texas, but we had folks from North Carolina. Gosh, I can't even remember where. New Mexico. We had several our conservation directors that came to the Classic. They come every year just to help. Yeah. And they're all volunteers, and we really appreciate them. Between them and Texas Parks and Wildlife and our bass tournament staff, it went amazingly smooth. Awesome. Hey, I have one more question, then we're going to take a break and come back and get into the whole fizzing thing. With all of your experience and everything that you've been involved with in fish care, I'm curious, over the last 30, 35 years, whatever the number is, has a boat manufacturer ever come to you and said, Gene, how can we build a better live well to take better care of the fish? Has that ever happened? Sort of. Back in the day when we had the summertime Bassmaster Classics, we routinely would measure oxygen and temperature levels in the live wells when the boats came in to the boat ramp at the end of each day. And we'd keep track of those statistics by brand of boat.
Huh.
And at the end of the day, or at the end of the tournament, we'd look at those numbers and say, this particular boat is routinely a little low on oxygen, or the temperature's a little high or something. And we'd go to that company and say, hey, we're not calling anybody out publicly, but here's something that we found out. And every time we had to do that, the next year they made changes to their Livewell systems.
Cool.
To accommodate that.
Yeah.
And, I've had some good discussions with some of the company owners and engineers about Livewell design and what they can do differently. A lot of times at the Classic or at boat shows, have a chance to talk to those people in person and just, work the deal out. And I remember one of the company presidents one time told me the challenge that he wanted to make Livewells better.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the big things with making a Livewell better is making it bigger. The more water you have, the more oxygen that the fish have, the fish are spread out. There's all kinds of good things from making it bigger. But that's where he ran afoul of his engineers, because you add more water, you add more weight.
Right.
And as he put it, when a guy comes into a boat showroom and wants to buy a bass boat, they never ask, how big is that Livewell? They always ask, how fast does that boat go?
Yeah.
And so for them, it's a balancing act of trying to figure out, okay, how do we do this, maximize the efficiency of the Livewell, but not completely screw up the performance of the boat.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's a big challenge for them. Of course, that's gotten better over the years. The Livewells have gotten bigger routinely across the board. I think most boat companies now have bigger Livewells. They have multiple pumps. They have better aeration systems, better controls. So I think, you think back 20, 30 years, there have been a lot of advances over the years that have really made a difference in how well the fish can survive that whole ordeal of being caught and put in a Livewell and hauled around for several hours.
All right. We're going to not take a break. We're going to keep going, and then we'll take a break because there was a couple of questions that popped up on the YouTube comments that I want to get to right away, and then we'll take a break and come back, talk about fizzing fish.
Okay.
The first one is, what's the best way that guys and gals clean out their Livewells?
Hydrogen peroxide is probably the safest thing to use. It does a pretty good job of sterilizing any kind of crud that's growing in there. That you got to remember to run the recirculating system so that it gets through all the hoses and tubes and pumps and things that are in there. And just the nice thing about hydrogen peroxide is that after it's done its job, it goes away. And as soon as you put water in there and flush it out, that's really all you need to use. I kind of try to stay away from, things like bleach work great, but if you don't get it good and cleaned out, then you have chlorine issues. And the other kinds of cleaners and stuff that are on the market, I don't know anything about them and what's in them to know if residue and stuff might pose a problem.
Yeah.
That's why hydrogen peroxide is cheap. I mean, a pint bottle of it's 67 cents or something, at Walmart. So it's to me, that's the easiest thing to use.
All right. And then the second question is, I hope I can say this right. Oxygenationing products.
Oxygenators.
Oxygen. Yeah. That.
Uh-huh.
Is that a good thing? Are there, kind of a guideline on that? Are those really helpful? What's the scoop on that?
For when the oxygenators first came on the market, the guy that kind of invented that came to me at one of the classics and said, "Hey, I've got this idea," and we talked about it. And it kind of developed from there. That company's been bought and sold 2 or 3 times. I think TH Marine actually owns them now.
Yeah.
But the little round disc that generates oxygen. A lot of boats have them mounted in the Livewell. The study that Texas Parks and Wildlife actually did a study on these things several years ago. And what they found was that by themselves, they are not enough. they are really no more than a supplement to a good aeration system. If you've got a lot of fish in the live well, those oxygenators don't generate enough oxygen to keep up with the demand. The fish are going to use more oxygen than those devices can put back into the water. Mm-hmm. You've got to have the whole system working. And then they're a good supplement when you're under kind of stressful conditions. If you're in really hot weather, if you've got a big load of fish, they're helpful in adding that little bit extra that you might need. They're certainly not as efficient as a bottled oxygen system. And I know that a lot of people have used bottled oxygen systems, especially in smallmouth tournaments, where you're actually using a small oxygen bottle about the size of a fire extinguisher and putting pure oxygen directly into the water. And that's the ideal situation. And that's what we do when we're hauling fish, from a fish hatchery. They use bottled oxygen. It's not as convenient, but and it takes a little more care. You got to be careful with the whole system. But that's the ultimate way to take care of the fish, is with a bottled oxygen system. But again, you can overdo anything. You don't want too much oxygen in the live well. But the oxygenators, the devices are no more than a supplement. So people shouldn't assume that, well, I can flip a switch, I can pour some of this secret chemical in there, and my fish are going to be fine. You got to be a lot more conscientious than that, especially in hot weather, and especially with smallmouth, because they are much more sensitive to low oxygen levels. So you really got to think about it, and you got to pay a lot more attention to the details. And that's just one. The oxygenator is just one little component.
All right, there you have it. Great questions from the fans there. So we're going to do this. We're going to take a break, and then we're going to come back, and Gene is going to talk about what everybody wants to talk about, fizz and fish. So we will get into that. But first, when Gene got to the studio this morning, he came inside and sat down and said, "I've got some things for you." And he sent me some pictures. And these pictures are quite good. It brought back a ton of memories. I'm going to throw up one right now. Look how young that dude looks right there.
2008. Bassmaster Classic.
14 years ago. Yeah, I was tired. I was really, really, really tired. Running the camera and classic weeks, they're a grind.
Yeah.
And the way they used to be before the technology existed, it was so demanding. I think I was averaging like 2 hours of sleep a night. And I remember Keith Blackstone and Brent Conway, when the Classic was at Orlando. I can't remember what year that was. The first one that who won that one? I don't even remember who won that one. Lou Clausen. Yeah, Lou Clausen won that one. I did not go to bed on day 2 because I was having all kinds of computer issues. And the video that we took wouldn't render, and it was just a mess. And I remember Keith waking up at like 3 a.m. going, "Dude, go to bed. Go to bed. You're keeping me up. Go to bed." And I managed to overcome adversity, just like we have overcome adversity over the last 2 weeks. So
back in the day when it was all about being there.
Yeah. Now it's all about being live. So
that's right.
That's kind of where we're going. So we'll take a break. Come back with Gene here on a Tuesday. Thank you, everybody, once again for all the support, and we'll be back.
Elite FS puts the full range of Lowrance fish finding tools at your fingertips. Find fish with active imaging 3-in-1 with Fish Reveal. Target fish with active target live sonar and watch fish react to your lure as it happens. Built-in C-Map Contour Plus charts make it easy to find key fishing areas. But best-in-class charts and powerful sonar is only the beginning. It's easy to build your fully networked FS system. From sonar and waypoint sharing to controlling the Ghost trolling motor and power poles. Lowrance Elite FS. Targeting fish just got easier.
BassCat's legendary 20-foot platform has been paired with angler-approved accessories for 2021. Puma FTD features the proven hull used by many of the top names in bass fishing today, backed by a transferable lifetime warranty. The Puma FTD boasts a full team deck concept which enhances efficiency for you and your tournament partners. Turnkey tournament winning performance. The Puma FTD SP from Basscat.
So, you're looking to buy fishing electronics, huh? Are you also looking for true experts to help guide you through it? Well, at the Bass Tank, you've come to the right place. We are live forward-facing sonar pioneers with thousands of hours spent learning through winning trophies, cashing checks, and just having fun. Whatever brand you need, we have it. We offer free shipping, and we have 2 financing options available. Our experts are here to help you. Call us today or visit thebasstank.com.
Preparation is key to success. And that preparation starts well before you ever hit the water. You're only as strong as your connection to the fish, and your line is that critical connection. Confidence in your line every minute of every day on the water is a necessity, and failure, it's not an option. Sunline makes the fluorocarbon, nylon, and braided lines to give you the strength to guarantee your confidence.
I've been my living on the water for over 20 years.
For 14 years. For over 23 years.
I've worn a bunch of different clothing brands over the years.
Some companies big.
And some companies small.
All of them said they were making clothing for us.
But none of them knew us.
None of them were us. Except for one. Except for one.
Except one.
AFCO.
AFCO.
AFCO. AFCO.
Fishing isn't part of us. It is us.
Everyone, Brandon Palnick here. People always be asking me what I got tied on. I'm like, X-Zone lures. And they're like, Brandon, why you got X-Zone lures tied on? And I'm like, let me show you why.
The bite.
Get out of there. Get out of there. Oh, yeah. Oh, it's freaking digging. Get in here. Oh, God. Giant. Oh, my God. Oh, my God.
I think you get the point.
All right, we are back on a Tuesday as we welcome Gene Gilliland in studio. And it is that time to start talking about fizzing fish, Gene.
Fizzing fish. You know, this is a recurring theme. I know you guys have talked about it a lot. Matt's talked about it. He went through the training up at St. Lawrence River, Clayton, and there's a lot of, as I said earlier, there's a lot of misinformation out there, and hopefully we can kind of start clearing some of that up, because that's what we've got to do if we want to protect our fisheries and do it right. The first thing that a lot of people ask about, they're afraid of fizzing, or they've done something wrong, and maybe they even killed a fish because they did it wrong. And they said, well, I just use these clips now. And people are using these little
hang on here. Let me
weighted clips.
Right
it's
there.
Just a little alligator clip with about a 2-ounce weight on the end of it. And you clip these onto the fins on the bottom of the fish, on his pectoral or anal fins. And when the fish are in the live well and they've come up from deep water and their swim bladder's all inflated, they're rocking back and forth. They can't maintain their equilibrium. So you put these little clips on there and they stand right side up and they sink down to the bottom of the live well. And people assume that that's fixing the problem. Well, it's really not fixing the problem. It's treating the symptom, but it's not curing the disease, so to speak. The problem with when the swim bladder swells up in a bass is that pressure is putting a lot of strain on the internal organs. And if it's severe enough, it can actually slow their heartbeat down to where they're not circulating blood like they need to. It can change how fast they breathe. So it does a lot of bad things to the fish. This doesn't fix that. all this does is make the fish right side up. Now, the only good thing about these things is that it does prevent the fish from struggling so much to try to stay right side up. So it does help, and it keeps them stronger so that when they are released, they can swim down to the right depth on their own. The problem there, though, is that the damage has already been done. And if a fish is in a live well for 4, 5, 6, 8 hours maybe, that damage to those internal organs is what's going to kill that fish 2 or 3 or 4 days later. They may swim away, but that doesn't mean they're going to survive. There was a study done in Canada at Queen's University just last year where they examined the use of fin clips compared to fizzing. And they said that fin clips are better than doing nothing at all, but they don't fix the problem. That's where you've got to learn how to fizz the fish properly, and you need to learn how to fizz in the boat. It can't be something that you just forget about the fish, put a clip on them, and then turn them into the tournament director and assume they're going to take care of the fish. Because the first aid that we can administer on the live release boat can't fix all of the problems that have been going on in that fish for 5 or 6 hours. You got to learn to do it in the boat. That's why we started training all of the anglers up in New York. Barb Elliott was going through this process of making sure they understood that you really need to do this. The first sign of problems, when you look in your live well and you see white bellies floating up at you, you got to get after it and do something about it right away.
Okay.
So Barb is, as I mentioned, they call her the Fizz Queen. Barb's on a mission to educate every angler on the planet, I think, about fizzing. And she put together a little kit, and we'll talk about all the components of this here. It's called Barb's Best Fizz Kit. And what it consists of is a couple of needles and a complete set of instructions, including some diagrams to show the target. If this is where you need to aim and how to find that sweet spot, largemouth and smallmouth, and then complete description of the process. And then the kit comes with 2 needles, and for folks that have dealt with fizzing, they may or may not know, we do not recommend going through the mouth anymore. Several years ago, some people decided, hey, this is a lot easier way to do. I can take a syringe with a needle on it, and I can stick it down through the fish's mouth and aim between the crushers and get it just right. And I can actually pierce the swim bladder, and I get bubbles, and the fish seems to do okay. The problem with going through the mouth is that you can cause more damage and more harm than good. A study that was done on Lake Amistad back in the 2000s, Texas Parks and Wildlife assembled a whole team of people. They electrofished about several hundred bass, put them in a giant cage, lowered the cage down to 30 feet of water, let them sit for a week.
Wow.
After everybody got assembled, they pulled the cage up really fast, and now we've got several hundred bass floating on the surface of this cage. And that's when we went to work, using different techniques to figure out what worked the best. A scientific experiment to figure out what technique was the best for survival. Because after each one of the fish was treated, some of them were fizzed through the mouth, some through the side. Some were fizzed by people that had never picked up a needle. Others were fizzed by people that were experienced doing it. Some of them we didn't do anything to. We just let them float. And then those fish every one of them was tagged, so we knew exactly how that fish had been treated. Fish were all put back in these gigantic nets that were probably as big as your entire studio here.
Wow.
And held for a week. And then at the end of a week, we counted the bodies to figure out who lived and who died. And fizzing through the side was significantly better than any of the other techniques of fizzing. Now, if you could release the fish right away and he was strong enough to swim down on his own, that was great. But a lot of times these fish are bloated so badly, they just can't submerge. They float back to the top. Some people will take a big weighted hook and hook it onto the fish's jaw and drop it down, and then you pop the hook loose. And the fish, once he gets down to that depth, the water pressure recompresses that swim bladder, and they do okay. But that doesn't work in a tournament situation. You can do that, that's a one fish at a time kind of a thing. Out in the saltwater, they make these devices called a sequelizer, which is a little clamp that clamps on the fish's jaw. It's got a weight on it. You lower this thing down, and it pulls the fish down to the right depth, and it automatically releases. The problem with that is it's a one fish at a time kind of deal, and it's really kind of a slow process. Now, if you're catching red snapper in 600 feet of water, it's a little different kind of deal. But side fizzing was shown and has been proven now in several new studies in the last few years to be the technique, and it needs to be done in the boat as soon as you see symptoms of those fish in distress. The needle that we use is nothing special.
Oops.
I buy them at the local farm supply. It's an 1.5 inch, 18 gauge needle. That's a nice size. We don't like them any bigger than that because it puts too big a hole, and you don't need a bigger needle.
Here, throw that up one more time to where they can see. Right, the other way. There you go. Right there.
It's an 1.5 inch, 18 gauge needle.
Okay.
Now, excuse me. The real key to this device. Let's go back to the little camera again.
Okay.
Something that Barb Elliott came up with. One of the problems with any kind of needle, when you stick it in the fish, a little pieces of muscle, as you're going through the side of the fish, little pieces of muscle sometimes will plug up the needle, and you stick it in there and you don't get any bubbles. And you pull it out and you got to blow it out or do something, and you stick him in again. Well, she came up with this idea of putting a little wire reamer inside. We can focus on that. It's a little tiny, thin piece of wire that goes inside the needle. So as you're inserting the needle into the fish, this little piece of wire is preventing it from getting plugged up. You push the needle in, tap that down, and make sure there's nothing in the needle. You pull this out, and you'll get bubbles 99 times out of 100.
That's awesome.
It is a huge difference maker in terms of the success you'll have with your fizzing. She buys a special size wire that fits right inside the needle. I found some spinnerbait shaft wire in the Bass Pro Shop catalog that just happens to be exactly the right size to fit in the needle. So I make mine. It's already got a little loop on the end. You just tie a little piece of braided line on there just to connect it with your hub so that it all stays connected. But the reamer is a really important little piece of the puzzle there. The other part of it is the where. Now this photo is actually the smallmouth. It's really not that difficult to figure out where you need to put the needle. That swim bladder is actually a pretty big target. It covers a pretty good area in there. And when you go through the side, if you're pretty close to that crossroads there where those two lines intersect, there's nothing else you're going to hit. You're going to go through skin and muscle and right into the swim bladder. It's not like you're going through a bunch of other organs. That's one of the problems they found with going through the throat through the mouth was that if you're a little bit off, you can puncture the heart, you can puncture a whole bunch of important blood vessels, you can go into the liver. There's a lot of things that you can hit that you don't want to hit going through the mouth. And what we found in that study in Texas, when they autopsied a lot of these fish, the ones that were fizzed through the mouth bled internally. The angler never saw that. They thought they were okay. They got some bubbles come out.
Yeah.
The fish looked fine. 3 days later, the fish is dead. So what it looks like when you release it is not what we're wanting that fish to survive long term, not just long enough for you to turn it loose. And so that's kind of where we started thinking, okay, we got to do something different. And the side fizzing has proven over and over to be the way to go. Once you've done it a few times, it's really not that hard. It's not that scary. That's part of why when we do the fizzing training for the elites, we actually get them to bring live fish in during their practice day. They can bring in a couple of fish. Barb will show them how to do it on one and then hand them the other fish and say, here, you do one. And they'll actually physically fizz the fish. And once they've done it, they're like, oh, wow, this is easy. Why haven't I been doing this for years? And more now, I'm seeing guys that are really starting to think about it. They don't want dead fish penalties. They want to take care of those fish, and so they're doing a better job of taking care of them, watching them in the live well, treating them right away. In fact, I've seen some of the guys that when they're culling fish, they're going to release one. They know, hey, if I turn this fish loose right now, it's just going to float down the river. Well, we don't want that. So they'll fizz them and then turn them loose. And that's what we want.
Okay.
If they're catching them really, really deep, sometimes when you turn them loose, they can't swim down on their own. If they're caught at 40, 50 feet of water, you almost have to fizz them before they can get back down on their own, because they just don't have enough energy to swim, especially a place like St. Lawrence where they're catching them on 6 or 8 pound line, and they're fighting that current. That fish is just worn out, and they don't have the energy to be able to swim down deep enough for the water pressure to recompress that swim bladder. So they've got to be treated in the boat. So that's the big thing. For people that are interested in these kits that Barb makes, they can get in touch with her on Facebook. If they'll just search for Barb Elliott, ELLIOTT, Barb Elliott. There you go. Let's look at the.
Yeah, let me throw it up here. There we go.
We can read that or not, but it's her Facebook address. Just search Barb Elliott, and she can, and then
here, put it up again,
and then message her.
There you go.
There you go. If you'll just search Facebook for Barb Elliott, and then send her a Facebook message through the instant messaging thing. That's pretty much the best way to get in touch with her. She sells this little kit for like $10, and it's got all the instructions. It'll have 2 needles. They come in a little pill bottle, so you can keep them handy. The other thing she put in the pill bottle now, it's a little piece of Velcro, so you can stick it on the bottle, and you can stick that bottle with your needles somewhere handy, so it's always right there, and then put your needles back in there afterwards. Now, one of the things that we have had people question is the idea of sterilizing the needles. Do you need to sterilize them between fish? If you put a little splash of rubbing alcohol in here, that's fine. But, for the most part, these fish live in a really dirty environment. And even if you have a sterile needle, as soon as you pierce that skin, you're going to be taking bacteria and stuff that's on the skin with it. So we've never seen any real issues with infections in any of the studies that have been done. So that's not a real big concern. If you, like I say, if you really want to get crazy about it, you can put a little bit of alcohol in. Now you want to make sure that before you use that needle, dry it, just air dry it to evaporate the alcohol. But that would really be all you'd need to do. But it's a simple technique. The people that work our bass live release boats, we've trained every one of them on this technique. And in some tournaments, we fizz hundreds of fish, and it just depends on how they're catching them. If it's a deep water bite. But the other thing that people don't always pay attention to is that fish can suffer from the inflated swim bladder, even if they're caught fairly shallow. I remember years ago working a tournament at Sardis Lake in southeast Oklahoma, where we were fizzing fish that were caught in 5 feet of water.
There's deep water in Sardis?
Well, it doesn't have to be deep.
Okay.
It's a stress reaction.
Interesting.
And with smallmouth, you'll see that too, because they fight so hard that the blood chemistry and whatever gets kind of haywire in them, and it causes that swim bladder to swell up. And it's a slow process for that swim bladder to deflate by itself. Bass can't burp. There's no physical connection. There's no exit from the swim bladder to the outside. It's a sealed little pouch. And the way the gas comes in and out of it is through the blood vessels that go around it. And most of those blood vessels are kind of up at the front. Another reason you don't want to go through the mouth is that you think about those blood vessels kind of like a spider web up at the front of that swim bladder. If your needle goes between one of those blood vessels, you're good. But if it hits one, that fish bleeds internally and you don't know it. So that's another reason we want to stay away from the mouth fizzing and go to the side. And like, again, follow the guidelines on her little diagrams there. For a complete set of instructions on this, Bassmaster.com has, we put together a video several years ago that Barb is going through the entire process of fizzing and why it's important. So if you go to Bassmaster.com, scroll all the way down to the bottom of the page where the conservation news is, you'll see a tab or a link for videos. And there are videos on that, in that folder, for fizzing smallmouth and largemouth. And really the only difference is the target. Your needle location is just a little bit different. Spotted bass tend to be more like largemouth for those that are catching spotted bass. But those videos go through the whole process. It talks about the needle. It talks about the reamer. And it's a really good explanation of the process to help people get comfortable with it so that they feel good about it and they're willing to do it in the boat as soon as the fish shows signs of needing it.
Right.
And it can make a big difference. When we went through the training process for the elite pros several years ago, the first time we did this, the year before we had like a 92% release rate, which is pretty good.
Mm-hmm.
The year after we did the training, our release rate was 98%.
Wow.
I mean, and when you're talking 1,400 fish, that's 6% different. That's a lot of fish. And those are typically on the St. Lawrence. Those are big, old smallmouth that are very much worth saving. And that's the whole goal.
All right. We have some questions.
Let
me throw this one up first from Brian. Can you fizz the same fish multiple times a day, hour? How many fizzes is too many?
I don't know how many is too many, but yes, you can. Sometimes you'll fizz a fish and in the live well, that stress problem will continue to go on and they'll swell back up and sometimes you have to fizz them again. The the hole that you made with the needle tends to seal up very quickly. I liken it to when you go to a doctor and you get a shot, they've got a little bottle that has a little rubber stopper in it that they stick the syringe in to take the medicine out. When they pull the needle out, the bottle doesn't leak. That little rubber stopper in the bottle closes up.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what the swim bladder does. It's a very elastic organ. And when you stick the needle through there, it creates a hole, but it closes itself back up. And the fish we autopsied were completely healed in 2 or 3 days. You couldn't even tell that they'd been fizzed. So yes, you can fizz the same fish a couple of times. Usually that's all it takes over the course of a day. That a time or two should be enough to get that fish in good shape.
All right. To add to that, Ronald wants to know, after releasing a fizz fish, thoughts on the fish living with a punctured swim bladder, and you just addressed that.
Yep. It's a little tiny hole, and that organ is so elastic that it pretty much closes itself up. That's one of the reasons I don't like some of the store-bought fizzing devices on the market have really big needles. I don't know what gauge they are, but they're much too big, and they do leave a much larger hole.
All right. Doug wants to know, what's a good way to practice fizzing?
I used to tell people, and I guess it's still a decent way, is get a small bass and cut him open. Cut his side off. Fillet it basically on one side so that you can physically see where that swim bladder is. That kind of puts in your head, okay, here's my target. Look at the diagrams. You can kind of get an idea of, the crossroads and where you want to start your target. But it's to me, it always seemed to help put it in people's minds if they could really see what's going on inside the fish, and cut them open, and that way oh gosh, that even in a 12-inch bass, you're going to have a target that's probably that big. So it's pretty good way to do that. If you fish somewhere where you constantly catch a lot of fish in deep water, get your instructions out, follow the guidelines, and just practice. That's the way to go. Is just try it. For the most part, if you follow the procedures there, it's not going to hurt the fish, and give you something to practice with, so that when you really need it.
All right, here is a question from Aaron, a little different. Gene, I would love to know, is there any truth to when fisheries use slot limits to grow the population as well as their size? Basically, what's your thoughts on slot limit lakes?
Slot limits have been found to be of very little effect almost anywhere that they've put them.
Really?
There's a lot of lakes where people think, oh my God, look how great this fishery is because of the slot limit. And in most cases, it's not because of the slot limit. Lake Fork, perfect example. What is it, 16 to 24-inch slot length limit?
Yeah.
Nobody keeps small bass anymore. For a slot limit to work the way it was designed, the idea is thin out the small bass so there's more food available. The ones that are in the slot then have a lot more to eat, and they grow faster, and they get out here on the big end of the slot, producing more trophy or quality size bass. A lot of slot limits, say, are 13 to 16 or 12 to 15. It varies across the country.
Mm-hmm.
But what's happened is, over the years, the harvest of bass has declined so drastically almost everywhere. Now everybody says, oh, I see people keeping bass all the time. Well, when the studies are done and they actually count how many fish are leaving the lakes, 30 years ago, 40 years ago, when people kept fish routinely, about 40% of the bass that got caught went home with somebody to the dinner table. That number is more like 5% now.
Wow.
And so for a slot limit to really work, you got to harvest the little fish. And that's just not happening in any significant numbers. So what's happened now is you've got a maximum size limit. If, let's say you've got a 13 to 16, about the only fish that ever get kept. People don't want to keep a bunch of little fish that are only this big. But they will keep some of them that are this big. Yeah. And so they tend to harvest the bigger ones. And that's kind of counterproductive. You really, I always like to think of the fish population as a pyramid. There's a lot of little fish at the bottom of the pyramid, and as you go up to the top of the pyramid, there's fewer and fewer fish.
Yeah.
Well, if you're starting to crop off the top, there's lots of little ones down there munching all the groceries. It's much slower for other fish to grow up to the top of that pyramid. So
good description.
Slot limits have. There are a few places around the country where slots have made some impact, but it's typically only where there is significant amount of harvest of those smaller bass. Mm-hmm. And that's why a lot of states are changing up their regulations and proposing different things to try to encourage more catch and keep and less catch and release. Catch and release is great of the right size. It's that selective harvest concept that In Fisherman came up with years ago. Yeah. There's times when catch and release is great, but there's times when catch and grease is really the right recipe to make fishing better in a body of water.
Yeah, I remember that. I do remember that. All right, man. One more question, and then I am going to ask a favor of the BTL fans. I need to do another test, quote unquote test. And when we come back from our final break, we will do that. But what I want to know, Gene, out of all these years, all these times, because see, people, what you don't understand, Gene can catch it. He's a pretty good angler, pretty decent angler. What I want to know, and I don't think I've ever asked you this, smallmouth or largemouth, which one is it?
Smallmouth, hands down.
Really?
I'm a smallmouth addict. I've been all over the country chasing those little brown fish. I've been from New York to Washington State, and I've kidded with my wife. My ideal situation, and I love to fish for redfish too, by the way. Buy a place in Venice, Louisiana, and another one in Minnesota, and just migrate.
That would be good.
Largemouth, redfish, when it's cold, and then in the summertime when it's just stupid hot down here in the South.
Yeah.
Minnesota, Michigan, New York, Washington, the northern states where smallmouth are abundant. I've been going to Lake St. Clair every year for 12 years to fish for smallmouth.
Mm-hmm.
I've got a friend that has a cabin in Minnesota, and I'll go up there a couple times a year. It's no question, smallmouth are my favorite.
All right, let's do this. Here's what I need, folks. Obviously, hopefully everybody knows the challenges that we have had over the last couple of weeks. I think I have the Sunline hotline hooked up and ready to go. So what I need one fan. We're only going to take one phone call to see if it works. And if it does work, then yeah, I'm in business. I got stuff lined up. If it doesn't work, I'm going to know now, because what we're going to do tomorrow, we're going to have Gene on again tomorrow. And if it works, we're going to be able to take phone calls tomorrow, and you'll be able to ask Gene any questions that you would like to ask Gene. But
that doesn't mean I'll answer them, but I can ask.
You have the answer for everything, though. All right, I got to remember how to do this. Let's see here, because I got to remember what the number is. Is that? Oh, there it is right there. All right, there's the number, 405-253-5543. Let's see if it works. After break, we will come back and hopefully take one phone call and wrap up a great day with Gene Gilliland here on BTL. So everybody stay tuned. We'll be right back.
There's one.
You know what works. Now you need a bunch of them so you don't run out on your next fishing trip. The Big Bite Pro Packs feature 25 baits per pack at a price far below that of having to buy 5 packs of regular baits. Now the Pro Pack has a big brother, the Mega Pack. The Mega Pack features 100 of your favorite baits.
With these, one bag is usually plenty to get through the day. It helps me stay organized, helps me save money, helps me catch more fish.
All of us on the Pro Tournament Trail use Gamakatsu hooks.
Why?
Because they are absolutely the best.
It's not about how many bites you get.
It's how many you put in the boat.
Gamakatsu makes hooks for every fishing style.
We didn't come this far to lose fish.
Did you?
For more information, visit gamakatsu.com.
Pro-inspired, pro-designed. Tested and proven by legends on the water. Dominating the tournament trail for over 50 years. Everything you need, one legendary brand. Strike King.
Hey guys, Major League Fishing Pro Jacob Wheeler here with my new Signature Series line of rods with Ducket Fishing. We have my 7.2 cranking rod right here. Crankbaits can be very fickle, and having the right, having a lot of tip can be too much, and having not enough tip can, lose a lot of fish. So you really got to be careful. There's one or two techniques that I'm really adamant about having the perfect action as a crankbait, especially like a square bill, a DT6, those medium running crankbaits in the springtime when those fish's mouth are pretty tough. That's when I'm really on top of having my actions just perfect.
The Little John family of crankbaits designed by top tour pro John Cruz have excelled at catching bass in any condition for years. They all feature a flat-sided design and paint jobs that are seldom seen in mass production bait. The Little John family also expands with new rattling versions of the Little John 50 and Little John 50 MD. Both of these baits are proven fish catchers that will now be available in rattling versions for stained and muddy water. They feature the same great action and diving depths as the original 50 and MD sizes.
The Ned Rig. What rod should I be using with the Ned Rig? My favorite is the Denali Lithium multi-spin rod. It's our 7'4" length, great Ned Rig rod. It's got a great sensitive tip on it. It's long enough where I can make long casts, which you're usually fishing clear water with a Ned Rig, and it's got enough backbone to get those fish in. So check it out, Denali Lithium Series 7'4" multi-spin.
All right, we are back on a Tuesday, wrapping things up with my good friend, Mr. Gene Gilliland. So we're going to do this test now, Gene. I have no idea if it's going to work, but hopefully it will. So we have a caller on the line. Let's bring him in now. And what I need you folks to do is let me know if it sounds okay. All right, let's bring him in now. Hey, you're on BTL. Who is this?
This is Kyle Mott in Southern Illinois.
Kyle, how are you, man? How does it sound?
I'm good. How are you, Mark?
I am hanging in there, man. So appreciate you calling in. Since you did call in on this test, do you have a question for Gene?
Yeah, I'm curious to get Gene's thoughts on tournament fishing during the spawn.
Okay, hang on one second. Do you have your volume turned up on your computer or phone or whatever you have going on there? No? Yes. Is he gone? Kyle? He must be at a fire station or someplace. Kyle, you there, man?
Yeah, I'm here. I can hear you now.
Okay.
I couldn't hear you a second ago.
Oh, okay. Are you a firefighter?
No.
Oh, it sounded like you were at a fire station or something. No? No? Yes? No? Maybe? Anyway, go ahead, Gene.
Okay. Okay. Well, I hope we can hear the answer.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm having some issues here. I can't hear you very well.
Okay.
Okay. Well, the question was fishing during the spawn. My thoughts are it depends. The studies that have been done on largemouth bass populations, especially across the southern part of the country, have shown that fishing during the spawn has no effect on the bass population. Taking fish off the nest during a tournament or otherwise, there are enough other baby bass that survive from other nests to basically keep the population stable. I mean, think about it. Only two bass have to survive to replace their parents. So bass tend to overproduce. They produce bazillions of young, and that helps keep the population going. The further north you go, the smaller, the narrower the window, the shorter the window is when the fish have spawning times. In the southern states, heck, in Florida, they've got fish spawning from November all the way to June. In a lot of places, it's 2 or 3 months. In the northern states, it can be a month. It can be a very small window from heck, half the year the water's hard. So it's a little different situation where the fish have a much more confined spawning and what we call recruitment for those little fish to survive, to get big enough to make it into the next year. And so there are some studies that have shown that smallmouth, especially in smaller bodies of water, where taking those fish off the nest, basically that nest is eaten up by bluegills or gobies or whatever. The question that we still haven't quite answered in a lot of those situations, though, is yes, that particular nest is destroyed by egg predators when that bass is removed from the nest. But does that affect the entire population? We know that those individual eggs and fry don't make it, but what about the entire population? You think about something the size of a Lake Erie or Lake Ontario or Mille Lacs or these bigger lakes where fish can spawn from 2 feet to 20 feet deep. Are there enough nests that survive that in the long run, it really doesn't affect the population? Now, in a much smaller body of water, that in northern states, that may be an issue. So there's still a lot of research to be done on that to verify what's going on. My gut feeling is that in really big lakes, we're probably not having that big an impact, that Mother Nature and the environment is having a bigger influence on the survival of those young than people are, even with tournament pressure and that sort of thing. Water levels, water temperature, storms, you name it. Invasive species are certainly a big problem in a lot of places. Things we don't have a lot of control over. And so closed seasons and protecting the spawn there's still a lot of question marks about whether or not that's how important that is. But it seems to be that the further north we go, especially with smallmouth populations, that there's a lot of work needs to be done to figure out if there really is an issue there or not. But from your part of the country, the Midwest all the way through the southern states, for the most part, fishing during the spawn is, especially with largemouth bass, is not really impacting the bass population.
All right. You good, Kyle? I think he hung up. Oh. Hopefully he got that answer. I didn't learn anything. I think it works. Do I need to put the phone number up again? Let's see here. We'll take one more phone call. Help us out. Somebody, please call. I think I got everything else figured out. I don't know if I got this figured out. 405-253-5543. That is the number. All right, let me get rid of this because we have a call coming in here. Let's see if this works. Hey, you're on BTL. Who is this?
It's Vicky from Ohio.
Vicky, thank you for calling.
Well, I'm glad you got things working.
All right. Can you hear me? Do I sound okay? Is everything good?
You sound great.
Wonderful. I think I have it, Gene. Do you have a question for Gene?
No, not today.
All right. Maybe
tomorrow.
You're just helping us out then because we got it dialed in.
I am.
Thank you. All right. So make sure you watch and call tomorrow then. All right.
All right. Thank you.
Thank
Bye
you.
now.
All right. That sounded great, Gene.
Good.
So
worked out.
We'll take some phone calls tomorrow. And once again, somebody said there were numerous barbs on Facebook. So I'm going to read this off again. It's facebook.com/barb.elliot.127. That's where you can find these kits. So if you just did a search for Barb Elliott, I guess there's multiple Barb Elliots.
I didn't think about that, yeah.
But that will get you to the place to where you can get one of these fine kits. And do you think this is probably one of the best kits ever made for the anglers?
The best.
The best. There you have it right there. So good stuff. So Gene, he's going to be back in studio tomorrow. Any final thoughts for today? Dude, this is the most less stressed I think I've been in months.
Well,
still
great.
Stressed out a little bit,
That's
but
great.
yeah, it's all good. And oh, by the way, here, let me throw this picture up. I don't know. Let's see.
I went through my archive.
Look at that. I actually caught fish, folks, right there. Look at that young man, probably 20 pounds thinner. What year was that? Do you remember what year that was?
2007.
Jeez.
Broken bow.
15 years. That's the Federation event that I actually won.
Bass. That was back in the Bass Federation Nation days.
Yeah.
Yep.
I remember how I caught him. Any idea? And it wasn't a Carolina rig.
Jerkbait.
No.
Shaky head.
It was a shaky head and a chomper. The old chomper.
Yeah. The garlic smelling things you could. Yeah.
Yeah, it doesn't bother me now because I can't smell or taste either one and may not be able to for the rest of my life. So I could throw garlic. I could throw whatever, shad, crawfish. It doesn't matter. Doesn't matter at all. You mentioned redfish. Do you remember the redfish trip?
Yeah.
That we went on?
Yeah.
It was one of the classics at New Orleans.
New Orleans.
And we actually did that. And that was the first time that I'd ever been fishing for redfish. And that was a blast. Yeah.
Somebody else was with us. I can't remember who all it was, but
yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Fringe benefits of working the classic.
Somebody doesn't know what a chomper was. Doug. It's a twin-tailed skirted grub that smelled like pizza, basically, with a lot of garlic on it.
Yeah.
And it was a big hit back in the 90s and early 2000s, I think. Kind of an Ozarks thing.
Right.
But did me right numerous times when I was really, really into and a lot younger, a lot of the tournament fishing. So are you doing your smallmouth trip this year, or did you?
We did it. Yeah,
you did it. You did do it.
We didn't last year because of the COVID situation. We couldn't rent a place because they weren't renting to out of state tourists.
Yeah.
But this year we did our trip. It was kind of a crazy. All the planets aligned. The entire Lake St. Clair. Well, the Canadian side was closed, so the U.S. side. The fish were spawning everywhere.
Wow.
And there was no pre-spawn. It was every fish had decided that week they were going to spawn. And so it was just bed fishing bonanza. But it was also probably the most crowded I have ever seen St. Clair in 10 years.
Really?
Just the numbers of people. Everybody else decided that was the week they were going to go. It was, there's 4 public boat ramps on the lake, and every one of them had over 180 boats.
Wow.
And it was people parking on the street and the sidewalks, and
madness.
It was kind of take a number and get in line. And unfortunately, kind of by the end of after several days, you'd catch a fish off a bed and you'd say, okay, who's got the fish that has the most hook holes in his mouth? How many times has this fish been caught and released and gone right back to its nest and been caught again?
Wow.
But,
wow.
Which, after a while, that was a little less fun because it's see a fish, catch a fish, see a fish, catch a fish. But, that was kind of an unusual trip for us. We normally go during the pre-spawn.
Gotcha.
2 or 3 of us were just avid jerkbait fanatics. And, but we missed that this year.
Yeah. Yeah. All right, Gene. Great stuff today. Somebody mentioned on the instant feedback and on the comments, or like, talk about juice. Yeah. Gene gave up the juice today, especially on fizzing fish. So we're going to get a double dip at Gene. He will be back in studio tomorrow, and we will take some phone calls and talk about whatever we want to talk about. I've got more questions about smallmouth fishing, Gene. We're gonna talk some smallmouth tomorrow.
Okay.
All right. But great stuff. And once again, thanks to everybody tuning in. And Gene and I will be back in studio once again tomorrow. That's it. We're out of here.